um, a meaningful ceremony. But have to be a little theatrical, artistic, but with a sense of the sacred. Trungpa tried to do that a little bit. He was sort of getting into theater and trying to get into Shambhala theater and kind of enlightened theater. But he wasn't much of a writer that way, so it didn't work too well. But he kind of, just sort of looked like, House of Dr. Caligari or something. Great colors. But it's possible that we talked about that before, something with music and I think with using theatrical elements, you could have a more interesting kind of experience that would be. We can't really pretend, dress up and pretend to be Tibetans, but I think we could create an atmosphere and communicate something through music and lighting and chanting and things of that sort.
Yeah.
So it's worth thinking about. We did it sort of, when we were working with the 5 Buddhas. Mm-hmm. We created our 5 Buddha. That was both traditional and yet it was, we made our own sadhana.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. That was really great. I came across a podcast, and then I got the book of this guy. He's a doctor. I think he might be a psychiatrist, but he goes to like war-torn areas and just places where there's been mass traumas, and he's put together kind of programs for them to heal. And anyway, he was going off on, he was talking about meditation a lot and how that's so powerful. And he was saying, of course, there's called concentrative meditation. And then he said, he said mindfulness. So I guess he's talking about shamatha and vipassana. And then he said, then he started talking about what he called expressive meditations, which he described as like 5 to 8 minutes of just standing and shaking your body, and then they stand and do standing meditation, and then they do this dancing, and he was talking about how, and I had remembered reading about how, like when animals are traumatized or they're chased or almost eaten or something, they'll do this whole like full body shake, and then they kind of get over it. And he was talking about how that's the same thing, and how this expressive meditation stuff was pretty ancient. And so anyway, I got the book and I tried it a few times, and it's remarkably effective. Although you gotta get past a certain self-consciousness, and it reminded me of outer Rushin, actually, when that kind of stuff. The outer.
So you mentioned self-God. You're not going to demonstrate for us?
Sure. Yeah, I can.
You don't have to shy with me. I was a dance teacher for a long time and studied dance for decades.
Yeah. Well,
and so anything that moves is something I love to see, and I don't judge.
Mm-hmm. I thought of that. I thought of you, and you might.
Early in my path of looking at spiritual things, I did try to seek out things that movement. Mm-hmm. And so when you were talking about that, one of the things that popped back to mind that was so much fun and so kind of enlightening too. I'm curious if you've heard of it. It was called a walking yapa. Mm. And with each heel strike, each heel strike, we would chant I think they call them the Vajra of the day. And there were 7, one for each day of the week. And so we'd go out and go on these walks. And when you chant the Vajra, chant the word and you also use your eyes and you, I guess, you transmute all the visual stimulation into, a more meditative state, I guess. So you're no longer naming each thing that you see. Everything is transmuting it into the word of the day or the chant of the day. And I remember going down the I don't know how many of us, going down the double line in the middle of Hollywood Boulevard, doing this silly thing. And how it actually worked marvelously well, but it was also funny. Anyway, just thought I'd share that.
The Joaquin Yampa?
Yapa.
Yapa. Why?
And I couldn't tell you how it's spelled. I would guess YAPPA, but I have no idea.
That's interesting.
Sounds like Russian type practice again.
Yeah, it does. With the hung, everything becomes the hung and all that.
Well, seems to have lost a few people in our class here, but we'll continue on.
Well,
You want to mute? Well, I guess with just the three of us, you probably don't need to mute, especially.
okay.
So, last week, we introduced the Prajnaparamita in a few words. And part of that was the introduction of the mantra of Prajnaparamita, the goddess. And we talked a little bit about the idea of the feminine wisdom that Prajnaparamita represents. And actually, when we use the word feminine wisdom, there are a lot of different kinds of feminine wisdom. It's not one sort of wisdom, but it's lots of different kinds. And Prajnaparamita represents a certain kind of feminine wisdom that's different, say, than the different and not different from that represented by, say, Vajrayogini or by Ekajati. But I also wanted to link it up with a very interesting line of thought from the Judeo-Christian tradition, because there's a sense that wisdom, both in Buddhism and in Judaism, that wisdom was sort of there at the beginning of everything. And so I want to sort of explore how this is and what's being said here. So first I want to talk, there's a quote from Proverbs, and it kind of one of a number of them, but this one reads, "The Lord by wisdom hath founded the earth. By understanding hath he established the heaven. By knowledge the depths are broken up, and the clouds drop down their dew." So that's, by wisdom the earth is founded. And there are other phrases like this in the various Old Testament literature. This sort of ancient idea of wisdom being feminine, being a woman. And it's both a sense of relative wisdom, but it's also a sense of higher wisdom. And then there's this great quote that I came across by Tillich. Tillich was a theologian who was very prominent in the 1950s in America. And he was a very subtle thinker. And this is from his book called The Eternal Now. and he's talking about wisdom, and he says, the universe is created by the divine power in the presence of wisdom. Like the quote I just read from Proverbs. This is the vision of the author of the book of Proverbs and the poet who wrote the book of Job. Wisdom was beside God before the creation of the world. And he has a quote. When he made out the foundations of the earth, then I was beside him, wisdom says. When he gave to the wind the weight and meted out the water by measure. When he made, put my glasses on here. When he made the rain fall and the lightning and the thunder, he saw wisdom then and studied her. Until he says, the meaning of these words is that God explores wisdom, which is like an independent power beside him. And according to what he finds in her, he forms the world. The universe is, in all its aspects, the embodiment of wisdom. So that's the idea of wisdom is what you create worlds out of, what God's used to create worlds. And the next writer that, well, Tillich is interesting. Let me go back to Tillich again. Tillich is also interesting because in another book of his, The Courage to Be, which was one of his most famous books in the 1950s, toward the end of the book, he talks about how in Christianity they have to outgrow the idea of a theistic God. Now, in the 1950s, this is very radical stuff, and I don't know if anybody quite got it, but he said, yes, the theistic God is limited in that it's always a kind of relationship, and you have the limits of a relationship and the limits of subjective and objective, and this division between you and God and you and so forth. No matter how special that relation is, it still has all those kinds of limitations. And he said that there's you have to some point transcend that God who's also connected with tradition and history and everything else, and to be, your mind, and go to the God beyond God. And that was his idea. There was a God beyond God that was a truly transcendent God, that was the real God. And the other God was sort of you were connecting with sort of the suburbs, but not the real God. The theistic God was sort of just not quite there yet. But when you think about putting these two together, then you realize that, so when the God, who's the creator God, meets out the world, and Job is a very beautiful description where he talks about how, were you there when I formed this and I formed that and I made this and I made that and so forth and so on. And the God, this particular vision has God as sort of this creator, deity who's very powerful, but there's a God beyond him, which is prajna paramita, which is wisdom. That's what God is using, the creator God is using to create the earth. The earth is being created out of the divine wisdom. So a later theologian had a similar idea, and he expressed it in terms of that actually we needed to think of God in terms of the essence of God and the energies of God. Now, the essence, this is a Greek theologian in the 12th century called Palamas, and he's actually the most famous theologian in the Greek or Russian Orthodox tradition. And his view was that there was an essence of God which we do not participate in, that's totally transcendent. And then what we connect with in terms of divine reality is always just the energies of God. It's sort of like he compared it to the sun and its rays. That we don't get to the sun, but we benefit from its rays. We participate, we have contact, we have relationship with the rays of the sun, but never with the sun in its essential self. So that, again, that essential God, or that the sun itself, is a sort of God beyond God idea here. And then you have these energies of God, which is the creative aspect of God that, has all the different qualities of everything is coming out of various energies. And in Palamas's model, very similar to sort of those ideas, virtue brings us closer to God and vice takes us further away. So in terms of connecting with these divine energies, which are always present in the world, just like rays of sunlight, if we're virtuous, then we connect with these energies and they nourish us. But if we're being stupid and caught up in the poisons and such, then little of this light reaches us. So you can see that, and you may ask, well, how does this relate to Prajnaparamita? And I'll show you my map here. Can you see that?
Trying to get.
That's the sun. That's the sun. That's the rays, and that's our world over there. So that's the idea. Is you got the rays are the energies of God, and the sun is like the essence of God, or the God beyond God, or the energies of God, or the creative powers of God. He also calls it the uncreated energies of the Holy Spirit. But what's interesting, why I'm holding up this silly chart, is that the space, these rays actually, the rays are kind of deceptive. It's what light is it's a field. So the sun is radiating a field of light, and that field of light coming out of the unknowable center of everything, that field is Prajnaparamita. That field is of illuminated divine energy. That's Prajnaparamita. That's wisdom. And it's out of that field of divine energy radiating out of the inexpressible that Buddhas are born, Bodhisattvas are born, energies of God are born, creator gods are born, whatever you want comes out of that. And that then, in the Judeo-Christian tradition, then those creative energies end up creating the world and human inhabitants and so forth, who are all interlinked to this. And in Buddhism, it's a little different. Actually, get chart number 2. In Buddhism, it's a little less we're a little less solar centric. If you imagine there's kind of a disk, and this disk is like a solar disk, so it's a light disk. And there's obviously something, imagine this disk is on a flat surface. So you got this lighted flat surface here. And out of it are coming these energies that are represented by Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and so forth. But these energies are coming out of this illuminated light or clear light. But there's something behind the clear light. So there's, the light's there, and the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas are coming out of it. And then there's a source for that light, but that source we never get to. What we interact with are the Buddhas and the energies of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, and we see or can experience that surface, which is that illuminated light or clear light. So it's sort of, ultimate reality, clear light, Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, and then, all created things come out of that as well. The Nirmanakaya world is too, the physical world. So Prajnaparamita is this wisdom at a very high level.
Bruce, can I ask if I just understand? Prajnaparamita is that radiance right at like the millisecond or the millimeter beyond the source. It's like the cusp of the black hole or something like that, where we can't go, but she's right on the edge. And
she's the mediator between the manifest and the unmanifest.
Okay.
Well, we as manifest beings, we can't go, into the unmanifest. And there wouldn't be anything to see there anyway.
So, is that a bit different than like at the beginning? So, God is creating from wisdom, and wisdom is this. It's a different. What did you say?
Well, wisdom, I'm sort of combining it all together, but wisdom is the field of radiance.
Okay.
And so it's just sort of the field of radiance of the God beyond God, or the field of radiance of the inexpressible, or the reality, or of the Dharmakaya. I mean, different pointers here, but it's the radiance that then that's the wisdom with which that creator God, or the creative energies then. Now, see, in Buddhism, we don't have the creator God. We don't have this extra role in there. Basically, the energies, the divine energies take the form of the five Buddhas. And now the five Buddhas, the elements, the spiritual elements create the physical elements and so forth and so on, and things eventually they're sort of a basis for materiality out of the play of the elements and so forth. But in Buddhism, it's all kind of self-created. That you've got this kind of it's more scientific that way. So when I showed up my more scientific looking, this is more medieval looking, solar centric. This one, like a science, things coming out of, like a microscope. You're looking into a microscope or a telescope. And as you get, anywhere you go, things are very odd. And you see this kind of energetic level of reality where there's forces, like gravity and light and all these different kinds of, forces and such. So Buddhism is, in that sense, a little more natural in accordance with how we understand the world through science. Except that it does still have this sense of the feminine, this idea of wisdom as being this feminine. And in terms of the goddess, Prajnaparamita, she ends up then taking on a number of different roles. She's the field of light, but the classic definition is that she's discriminating awareness, wisdom. Because she's the sort of between the manifest and the unmanifest, she's aware of both. That's why it's wisdom. It's aware of the unmanifest and aware of the manifest. Within the realm of the unmanifest, there's no discrimination because it's a whole. Within the realm of the manifest, there's discrimination. And she can discriminate, so she knows the energies. Wisdom is aware of the energies that are arising within the space of wisdom. Divine energies are arising out of awareness. They're not arising out of they're arising out of consciousness and awareness and awakened energy, not out of ignorance. In contradistinction to, say, Hinduism, where Vishnu sleeps, and while he's sleeping, he dreams worlds. Paramita is fully awake during the whole thing. But again, Buddhism is self-existing awareness, wisdom. It's not like, and of course the Christian model, like I say, it's medieval, but it's actually Neoplatonic. I mean, Neoplatonic has a kind of hierarchy. It's sort of everything, comes down, which is a nice model. But the Buddhist one, like I said, is more modern, and in that you have this field of wisdom, and then things arise out of that through the energy that's there, the mix of divine energies. And energy in its that level is always pure. It's not until you get down to the levels of form and very manifest creation that then the energies sort of get frozen, and that's the level we're at, where there are divine energies that flow through us all the time. The whole radiance of wisdom and the creative energies of God flow through us, but we block them with our conceptuality, with our prejudices, with our ignorance and our unawakeness, and so forth and so on. So we really, we cloud ourselves up, and so those energies are muted. They're not gone; they're still there. They're just muted. It's not like the sun is supposedly just 1,000 feet above me here in Michigan, but some days I don't see it at all because the clouds are thick. So Prajnaparamita is that awareness that knows all reality, self-existing wisdom that's always present, and it's the wisdom that we experience when we stop our minds. So when we do that Prajnaparamita syllable within the one syllable, that's the very high Dzogchen practice, because the whole idea of just introducing you right then and there to no mind, that's the possibility of that particular practice. So I'll just say, we can talk about this, but I'll just say in conclusion that Prajnaparamita is also conceived of as ordinary wisdom, in the sense that in our own lives, I've been talking at this very metaphysical level of, the origin of creation, which is a place you want to reside as a Buddha. You want to be at the point of creation. Where's the point of creation? It's where the unmanifest turns into the manifest. And that's where wisdom has her home. But wisdom is also ordinary wisdom, in that in our world, energies are arising muted or clear or somewhere in between. And in our world, all the Buddha energies are also arising, and we also have wisdom as their base in our world. And wisdom is the space out of which everything in our life is coming at us. So because wisdom is there, there's that's why the phenomenal world can be a guru. So we say, well, how do you experience the guru? You experience the guru as the phenomenal world. Why? Because that interaction of divine energies arising and the underlying basis of prajna paramita that's happening every day of our life is this great field for experiencing directly, well, the true nature of things. So wisdom functions in our life as sort of a guiding light as we that illuminates these energies, and ultimately, in the deepest sense, it illuminates these energies that are rising in our life for what they really are, as truly divine, which gives us a whole sense of sacred world. So prajna paramita is really also the entrance into sacred world. And that is to see everything as an expression of wisdom. Then when we do that, then everything in the phenomenal world is a teacher to us, instructs us.
What's her role in Vajrayana? Because it feels like, you just said so much, but are there Vajrayana sadhanas for her, or are there other kind of dakinis that are expressions of her? I know like Chod Machik Labdron she was Prajna Paramita text, teacher and reader and all of that. Was Troma or anything like that?
Well, I think you have different. She gets sort of. Since she's a sort of primordial energy, wisdom has all sorts of names and guises and so forth. Ekajati in Dzogchen and also in the Nyingma tradition, Ekajati becomes sort of Prajna Paramita. She's because she's also that kind of, she represents that, she has one eye, one breast, and that is, the whole thing there is that she's undivided. And that's what wisdom is. Wisdom is represents an idea of non-divided unity and multiplicity together. Apollonius had a great phrase for that. He said, people need to understand that God and the essence of God and the energies of God, there are lots of energies of God, and there's one essence of God. And so that in total, God is indivisibly divided and united dividedly.
What about like
indivisibly divided and united dividedly?
Mm-hmm.
So that's the feminine. It has all these different forms. So in Vajrayogini, you get also in Vajrayogini, she's a wisdom deity. She's also a wisdom dakini. She's the queen of the wisdom dakinis. So she has that function. Ekajati has that function. Ekajatis in Vajrayogini are also considered to be, in Prajna Paramita, they're all considered to be like the same.
What about Samanta Badri? What's her relationship to Prajna Paramita? Is she the phenomenal world, or is she the source, more of the source aspect?
Well, sometimes it's sort of done more. It is interpreted, as Samanta Bhadra is like Dharmakaya, so he's like the sort of transcendent, inexpressible God that you never know, and Samanta Badri is his consort. Now, Well, what we just talked about, that would be Prajnaparamita too, right? But who is the consort of the Creator God? It's wisdom. Wisdom is the radiance of the inexpressible absolute. So in that sense, Samantabhadri would be. Now, ultimately, the phenomenal world is the expression of wisdom, because, the child of wisdom the world is the child of wisdom, or the embodiment of wisdom. Everything in the world is made of wisdom, directed and guided by wisdom, and so forth. But Madhuri really isn't the phenomenal world. That's more her daughter. She's the consort of the transcendent, which means she's the radiance out of which the phenomenal arises. There's quite a bit of, we're sort of on the border, and we won't go too far that way, but on light mysticism. Because light is something you actually can experience in meditative practice. So, in addition to just these mantras where you're chanting, like even the greatest practices, the Prajnaparamita in one syllable, there's still the Prajnaparamita in no syllables. And now we're into the yoga of light. And the yoga of light begins with just sort of awareness of light. So if we're talking about Prajnaparamita as this goddess of luminosity, out of which everything's arising, then what we want to start being aware of and expand our awareness to include is a sense of how light interacts with, in the world. Where's the light where's the light in the world? That's the first step, but then there's other things you can do too. But you gotta it starts with paying attention to light. But also in the practice of meditation, I'll take you one more step. In the practice of meditation, you can experience light, auras of light, sort of like feeling of light behind you, like being surrounded by sunlight and that kind of thing. And of course, with all meditation experiences, one should take them or leave them, should either take them or leave them. Just note them and let them go. If you try to, there's no way you can sort of, like, if you have an experience of some light, there's not really any way you can try just sort of resting in it, but it just does, after a while, it just sort of dissolves itself. If we could, because otherwise we would be in a trance and we eventually starve to death, and our friends would find us and it would be messy and stuff. And bring disrepute on meditation practice.
And this in the past you've talked about the similarities and connections between Dzogchen and Prajnaparamita. Seems to be another such case. Light, awareness of light.
Prajnaparamita is a very I want to call this. It has a very very subtle. It's very subtle. deeper dive into things. It's sort of like Zen and Dzogchen that way. It's sort of a minimalist kind of approach. Now, when we get to Yogacara and later on with the rest of Mahayana, things they pack it in again. And even in Prajnaparamita literature, there are. I'm kind of going for the simplest part of it, but it's there, and that's what's really neat is that there's this kind of beautiful, simple spiritual understanding that's very high. Light mysticism, properly understood, is very gentle and a beautiful sort of way to approach the spiritual path. So.
What's the timeline between Abhidharma, Prajnaparamita, and Yogacara? These are all overlapping, aren't they, or not?
Well, they actually sort of do overlap. The Abhidharma starts earlier. The Abhidharma is probably getting going even by the 3rd century BC. It doesn't get written down until later. And then the Prajnaparamita is somewhere between the 1st century BC and the 1st century AD for the oldest parts of it. But it runs on for hundreds of years, and so does the Abhidharma. Of course, later on, there's sort of an early phase to these things, a middle phase, and a late phase. And in the late phase of Abhidharma, you get a lot of you get a lot of systemization. So the texts start reading like handbooks, and they're massive, and they have commentaries, and they'll bore you to death. But the early phases, which I like, are much simpler and easier before they get, work into a whole religious system. You can sort of connect with that early insight and discovery.
And Yogacara comes after Prajnaparamita begins, or?
Yeah, more like the 4th century.
Okay.
Its heyday is like the 4th to 7th century. 3rd to 7th century, somewhere in there.
Okay.
Nagarjuna in the 2nd century becomes very famous because he writes commentaries on the Prajnaparamita.
Okay.
So Nagarjuna is associated with Prajnaparamita literature. In Madhyamaka, the school in Nagarjuna is associated with, although he didn't really call it the school at that point, I don't think, but it's based on Prajnaparamita.
Okay.
The idea of shunyata and emptiness. Yes? Armella?
Yeah, I can't write them down properly. Maybe could you spell them? That might help me. Nagarjuna?
Yeah, Nagarjuna. Nagarjuna. Nagarjuna.
And we're going to...
He's a very famous Buddhist philosopher.
Are we going
in the
to...
2nd century.
We're going to come to his text. Is that correct in the next course or this course? Or?
I don't know where we're headed.
Okay.
I'm adding myself to the spontaneous nature of primordial wisdom, so wherever that takes me, that's where we will go.
Okay.
But
One of
Right
the
now,
And the
I want to just sort of immerse ourselves a little more in kind of pure prajna before we get into the world of commentarial and philosophical literature. In fact, when I was doing the Achan, it made me remind me of when we went through the Dzogchen exercises off the text where everything was to demonstrate how to stop your mind. It's like, I have like 100 of these. It's like, break your conceptuality up in different ways. So. So Prajnaparamita is also called perfect wisdom. And this inclusion of the word perfect is very interesting. It means it's a higher wisdom than just sort of, ordinary wisdom. Sometimes in the book of Proverbs, although they have this little bit of this idea of like wisdom was there at the beginning, most of the wisdom that they're interested in practical wisdom, don't date whores, that kind of thing is an old Testament favorite. Watch your money, fear the Lord. But the Prajnaparamita is a perfect wisdom, and it transcends that kind of practical, hoary wisdom. And the Abhidharma also has a bit of that kind of, practical wisdom. A lot of the Buddha's teachings are very practical sorts of wisdom, about being virtuous and so forth. And that kind of stuff is all very useful, but perfect wisdom is the knowledge of the unmanifest, is the knowledge of the source. It's knowledge of all realities. It's not just not knowledge of the realities of this world, knowledge of the manifest, but it's knowledge of all of the manifest, the phenomenal. It's knowledge of the energetic forces, and it's knowledge of the source. So when you have all three of those, then you have perfect wisdom. Otherwise, if you just have knowledge of, how to drive around and not get lost, that's just one kind of level of wisdom.
we had to look at Paul. I remember looking at Paul Tillich and religious studies classes when I was at KU.
Oh, did you?
Yeah,
I think he's kind of forgotten now, but you're old enough that you would have read him the last.
Yeah, they had him in our the textbook, which was just an edited, so we never got a full. We were never expected to read a whole book of his, but I remember him. I remember the ideas. I remember all his definitions of God or something we went through. all the things anyone could ever mean by the word God.
He was important. I because he was in that era that I grew up in, and so it was existentialist Christianity. And existentialist Christianity has almost disappeared completely now, but it was very cool. And it's sad that it's disappeared. It disappeared actually fairly quickly. But in the 60s, it was its heyday. And the idea was that we had to relate to the reality of the world, which included things like despair, meaninglessness, nothingness, depression. Of course, they're coming out of World War II and the horrors of the 20th century. So they feel like everything that, the old ideas of God and Christianity are insufficient. And there's just a lot of different ways in which people have bad ideas about God and divine realities. And so they're trying to get this idea of how can you have a God that you can include all this kind of stuff. And that's where you first get how the God of theism fails, because even this idea of this all-powerful God, all-knowing, all-powerful God is just untenable, because you can't be all-loving, all-knowing, all-powerful. And why is he sitting around not doing anything? I mean, it is all a problem. He's not all-powerful. It's not. First of all, it's not a he, and the whole structure of the thing is not anthropomorphic. So there's nobody there to intervene in that kind of way. Now, this doesn't mean that something happened and there's spiritual intervention, but it's not happening in that kind of one being up there doing that. It's more a play of the divine energies, which are multiple. The essence isn't doing anything. The essence has no power. The essence power is not even a meaningful consideration to the essence of God, because power is a term of relative significance. It's not the absolute reality doesn't. What is power to the absolute? Nothing. I mean, it doesn't even make any sense. So there's all kinds of ways people get confused, and they were trying to come up with this way that you could, be true to experience, even horrible experience, and still have some kind of faith in larger spiritual realities. So it's a kind of, attempt to be more truthful, attempt to not, let go of past dogmas and stuff like that. And we came up with some very interesting creative stuff, but unfortunately, it was a little too late.
Did that come out?
Totally different, because by the time we got to the late 60s, people were tired of being depressed. They were tired of existentialism and beatniks, and what they wanted was happier, In the 70s was even more that way. So people just people decided to go a different direction, not live with the truth of painful realities. Unless you lived in Sweden, in which case they continually have to. In Finland, they always live in a black and white world, and people are always making Ingmar Bergman type movies up there and stuff. Suicide rate's really high. They get no light.
Was he like a student of Kierkegaard or something? Was he in that line? The Kierkegaard
late, the end of that line. It was the end of that line. Part of the problem is that the whole existentialist reality deals a lot with fear. People have lots of fear, it's a kind of, there's just a lot of dark, negative stuff. And that way have been news, you know, in the 1950s or, you know, in the 40s and 50s. But everybody knows that. I mean, you know, and people deal with that in different ways. It's sort of, you know, and people just don't like to, it seems in a way a little artificial, because unless you're actually living in a war zone of some kind in which you're at that level of kind of existential raw reality, most of us lived in a fairly cooked world, so to speak, and we're not dealing with that kind of rawness that gets, you know, where existentialism makes a good working philosophy. So that kind of dark world just doesn't work anymore. It's like film noir. There got to be a certain point where you couldn't make film noir. You had, you know, the world was too happy for that kind of stuff. People don't want that kind. They want happy stuff.
Like a disease without a cure. And
Yeah, that's the one where there's one thing where I agree with Trump. Trump is like in coronavirus denial, but I'm with him there. I think we should all deny it. That might be the best approach. I'm not going to relate to it as being real. I'm not buying it as. We'll see what happens. But you guys have a primary out there. Oh, your primary is the same as ours. Is next Tuesday, right?
Yep. Yeah.
You know, Revolution's kind of collapsed, no?
Yeah.
I think it's a game over for this time around.
You think Biden's going to take it, or do you think Bernie's got any?
No, I think Bernie's done. I think Biden's got it.
Can Biden beat Trump? I'm skeptical.
Yeah, I think so. I think he's the best bet.
And the only thing that can beat Biden is the coronavirus.
The only thing that can beat
I just mean literally, personally, health-wise. He's the coronavirus. You know, he's going to be out shaking hands and meeting the public a lot. And there's a danger because he's not the strongest. Unfortunately, Trump is strong. Hopefully, Biden's spiritual ducks in a row.
Well, Trump shouldn't even be alive. I mean, the guy breaks every health rule imaginable. I mean, the only reason he's still breathing is he's propped up by demons. I mean, otherwise he'd be dead by now. I mean, you can't eat whatever he does and exercise as little and be as fat and stress yourself out constantly and still be breathing. I mean, it's, you know, he's basically a plant. Yeah.
A plant.
A non-human being. A non-human being in our world just to cause problems for us.
Yeah. And the demons are getting a ride out of him, right?
Well, he's like driving into the ghetto with an SUV full of gold bars and leaving it open. I mean, demons just go walk in there and take what they want. He's a Grand Central Station for anyone who wants to go through him. He's got no defense. But anyway, yeah. Well, I don't know. I think it's wild the way they did it, but it's sort of getting down to going to be Biden versus Trump. It's going to be run on character. Apparently, Biden is supposedly, even though he's visibly past his prime, he's supposed to be a very kind and decent person. The opposite of Trump in terms of character. So I think we're going to have an election about character, not an election about class revolution, which would be good to have, but there's nothing I disagree with. It's just that it's not the right time. At least that's the feeling of people I'm talking to. So my son, he's depressed. You know, the old, he feels that the old people have just screwed the young people over, and there's nothing they can do about it. But, you know, I felt that way. I was his age too. I mean, I was a progressive. I lost how many elections did we lose? My God. We had to go through Reagan years. We had to go through Bush twice. I mean, when have we gotten a radical progressive president? Even when we got Obama, he turned out to be kind of a moderate, so that never happens.
One day our prince will come, right? Or princess.
Well, I've been reading all the articles about Warren. Warren was the one I liked, and wanted to see a woman in there, but it's a combination of mistakes she made and also getting torpedoed by the establishment. The establishment, they're not like, they're too inept to be a conspiracy, but they have their ways of undermining people.
I think there's something biological about without even talking to each other, they can recognize a threat from a female power and just close ranks. Like, no, that's not happening.
Probably.
I did like her honesty, and I liked her very much. She would have made a great president.
Yeah, well, she didn't make it. She's not making it till next week when I vote. So, but
she'll do good things, even if she's not a president.
I like her. I like her a lot.
yeah, there were a lot of good stories about her today in the paper, in the media. Or now that she's left, and now they're all saying nice things about her. They could have. There's a point there where she became the front runner, and they all ganged up on her. And that's when she kind of. And that's a tough one when the media has this way of just turning on a dime. Like 1 week this person's hot stuff, and the next week it's someone else's hot stuff. But now that people are actually voting, it's hard to do. I mean, the vote is gonna be myself, and I think if it gets settled sooner, it's better. I think it's time for Sanders to kind of start to fade out here, but we'll see. 2024.
2020.
First we get Trump out, then we get
Biden taken down from the left.
The fact is that most Americans really don't want to go to the left, so that's the big. I mean, Sanders is way far. I mean, there's only about 10% of the people that are out there wanting to do that, maybe and a lot of them are college students who do large amounts of debt.
College students who what?
With large debt.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Me.
Well, we will see you guys next week.
Okay. Thank you, Bruce.
We will continue. Good night.
Good night. Should we dedicate merit?
Yes. By this merit, may all attain omniscience. May it defeat the enemy wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may I free all beings.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.